Hi there, this video will describe how to create a Lego building block piece in Autodesk Maya. So within Maya I'm going to create some basic building primitives and then be able to manipulate them in two different ways. So this first video will describe the subtractive way, and then the second video will describe how to do the additive way. So we're going to build a couple of cubes. I'm always going to work on the grid so that everything will snap together. So as default, the grid space is 1 centimeter for one square. So when I create a cube, I know that is 1 centimeter. I'm going to create a 1x1 basic Lego building block. So I'm just going to use 1.5 for the height, and the width and depth will be 1. So that's going to be my basic building block. And then I'm going to build a cylinder that's going to be much smaller. Let's see, let's do something like 0.25 for the radius, 0.125 for the height. See what that looks like. Pretty good, rough size there. And I want to make sure this cylinder shape can snap properly on top of the base cube. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back to the cube, go to the poly inputs again, and we're going to add 2 subdivisions on the width, 2 subdivisions on the depth. That will give me the option with the pivot point, if I go up here to the viewport and turn on the wireframe on shaded, I can snap this object's pivot point, the cylinder, to the base central crosshair vertex of the top of the cube. And I can do that with the move tool on the cylinder. And if I hold down the V key, V for vertex, and click and drag with the move tool, that will snap the cylinder to the vertex in the center of the cube. So I can move this up some. I do want to have some overlap. What I could do is first move the pivot point for the cylinder down. So to move a pivot point, if I hit the D key on the keyboard, that moves into pivot mode. And then I can move the pivot location with the move tool. So I'm also going to hold down the V key here. I'm in pivot mode, and I'm holding down the V key. And I can click and snap the pivot point for the cylinder to the base vertex of the cylinder. So working off snaps, working off pivots is really helpful. Holding down V will snap an object to a vertex of another object. Holding down X will snap an object to grid points. So it's every 1 centimeter away. So for this occasion I want to hold down V and snap the cylinder to the vertex of the cube. Alright, so I want to have some overlap here because with the subtractive method I need to have overlap. So I'm going to go into component mode, which if I hold down right click, as default I'm in object mode. I'm going to go right click and choose vertex. That gives me the option to move, rotate, or scale individual vertices. So from a side view I want to drag select on the bottom series of vertices for the cylinder. And then let's, so if I hit 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, 4 is wireframe. So if we go back to shaded and select those vertices, I just want to drag this down so that there is some overlap there. Because we're going to be using subtractive methods to cut and combine objects together. Alright, so we're ready to go there. What we want to do next is create the cutout shapes for the underside of the Lego 1x1 cube. So the first one we're going to do is we need a thickness for the base cube. So I'm going to hit Control D, that duplicates an object. So Control D, that duplicates this cube. I want to reduce the scale, and I can do this mathematically by putting in like 0.9 for the scale X, 0.9 for the scale Z. You can see it decreased the size in those two axes, kept the height for it. And then from a wireframe standpoint of view, if I hit 4, I want to move this down a little bit. So it does have some thickness there. Okay. So this is going to be a cutout shape from the base cubic shape. Alright, for our Lego piece, I also need the peg at the bottom, the cylindrical shape on the bottom on the inside. So what I want to do is duplicate the cylinder, and I want to scale this up. So 1.1 and 1.1 in the scale X and scale Z. So that's going to be the outside section that this top peg is going to connect to, like on top of it. And let's do something larger, something like 4 for the scale. Let's go in our wireframe mode. So maybe something like 8, 10, something like that. So that way this is going to go all the way down to the bottom base standpoint. So I'm going to kind of match this so that there's overlap there from the inside cutout cube. And I'm going to go into vertex mode and select the bottom vertices. And I'm going to go back and use my snap tool here. So if I hold down the V key with these vertices selected and use just the vertical arrow of the move tool, I can snap that. Go into wireframe mode so you can see that. I can snap that to the vertex height here. And that just snaps the vertical position so that that matches that bottom line of my cube. Okay, one last shape that I need is this exact same cylindrical height, but back at the same size for a cutout shape of where the bottom peg would fit in. So let's hit Control D again. And I'm going to put the scale X back to 1, scale Z back to 1. So there's that. It's just the same scale as the original peg. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. So that way we do have some overlap going on there. So I actually have a base cube, and then this is the top peg of the Lego piece. Then we have a cutout cube, and then this is the bottom insert cylinder piece that the peg at the top connects to, and then a cutout cylinder, so the peg can actually fit through there. So this method would actually use a subtractive method. So we're going to use the Boolean tool to combine these objects together, but either union or combine and weld, or create a difference, which is like a cut command, cutout command, so like a cookie cutter type shape. So with Booleans, we're going to go over here to the modeling toolkit, and we're going to be using the Boolean tool here. So this is a add, combine, or cut command between two different objects. So the order of operations really matters here. So you're always going to select the bigger object of the two that you need to select, and then the smaller one. It is important in that order. So my first Boolean, my base cube with my top peg. So I'm always going to select the base cube as the larger object, and then the smaller object's the top peg. Just those two. Boolean will only let you do two objects at once. So let's do Boolean with those two objects selected. It's going to come up with the option box, and for this first one I'm going to choose a union. So if we go to wireframe, what that does is it removes any overlap. Basically keeps the outside areas, removes any interior geometry between the two. Alright, the next Boolean I want to do is from that combined Boolean object of the peg and the base, and I want to cut out this cube that we created for the center. So let's take that bigger object, shift select the cutout cube, and we're going to click Boolean again. This time it's Boolean it together, but we want to change the operation. Union combines them together, removes inside. What we want to do here is change it to difference. So if I click union and change that to difference, that now cuts the cube, smaller cube, out of our bigger shape. So you can kind of see from a wireframe, this is all one object now. Those three objects are now combined and merged together. Alright, we got a couple more Booleans to do. So we're going to take the combined object and then shift select the outer cylinder shape, which is the inside area the peg connects into. So outer bigger shape, then to the inside cylinder, and we're going to do Boolean, and we're going to go back to union. So this is going to be a union and combine those two together. So now the inside outer cylinder is connected, but the overlap areas are removed. One last Boolean is to cut out this inside cylinder shape. So we're going to select the outside object, shift select the inside cylinder, do a Boolean, and we're going to do difference this time because we want to cut this small cylinder out of the larger one. There we go. So that will kind of cut all of the forms, combine all the forms there together. Now one thing that is really important, that's the last Boolean that we're going to do. But what's really important is to look at our outliner. And we see all these blank groups now with transform nodes. So we only have one object now, has the polygon symbol on there, and then we have a bunch of groups with transform nodes under there. This is the history of those objects as they are combined and Boolean together. So we want to make sure we select this object after we do all of our Boolean to get the shape that we want, and go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Now when I do this, that removes all of those extra groups. So it just has our final Lego piece. So now we can rename this. Let's see, Lego block underscore 1 by 1. Let's say that. 1 by 1 piece. Alright, so those are some steps to create subtractive geometry. A couple things we can do to finalize the model is to look at how clean the geometry is. So we have some triangles. Let's see, let's go to face mode. So right click and go down to face. This is a triangle all the way around. This is an n-gon, more than 4 sides. So we want to try to convert this so everything's 4 sides. And then the last thing we're going to do is move the pivot point. So that way we can snap everything together. So pivot point's really nice to finalize after you get your shape formed. I'm going to hit the D key again. And I'm going to try to stay consistent. So we'll move over here in between the positive Z and X axis, which is over here on this bottom right side. So the D key gets into pivot mode, and then I'm going to hold down the V key, V for vertex, and drag that down to this bottom right corner vertex there. Let's hit the D key again. So now what I can do is hold down the X key, X for X-ray, and then drag this up, and it'll snap to the grid points. So if I hit Control D to duplicate, snap that over, Control D to duplicate, snap that over, everything works based off of the grid. Alright, to show for comparison, this is what Booleans will create. It'll create combinations of triangles, n-gons, and quads, which is not the best for a lot of secondary points for modeling. So what we're going to do is, I just duplicated it to show you how we can correct this and clean this up. I'm using Maya 2020, and they have automated tools called remesh and retopologize. You can find this under mesh dropdown, remesh and retopologize. If you're using a previous version, I'll show you the simple command code you'll put in to the mail script to use this, but if you're using 2020, we're going to use remesh and retopologize. So we'll leave one with its default Boolean, and then I'll show you the good improvement from these two tools. So with this object selected, if I click on the remesh tool, what that will do as default is create triangles throughout the whole model. So that gets rid of any n-gons. Okay. What we may need to do is lower the max edge length, 0.2 maybe increase the collapse threshold to balance out how it is reproducing this form. You can play with a couple of these values, but changing those two, max edge length and collapse threshold, is going to be really important when we get to the next step, which is retopologizing. So remesh triangulates everything, tries to create a uniform amount of the same shape and size. So next step is retopologize. So if I click on retopologize, that might take a little time. So let the bottom right or bottom left corner run through its process until it says 100. What retopologize does is converts everything into quads. Okay? And it'll automatically try to round off shapes, as you can see there. So some of the shapes aren't as 90-degree angles. We can go over to the attribute editor and see both of those commands now. So we have in the arrows, the top, the tabs, there's a remesh and a retopologize. So you can change these as you need to. One thing I am going to change is the preserve hard edges, because I want to have these hard edges for my Lego piece. And that takes a second to retopologize. You can then change your target face count if you want a lower face count. So I can type in 500 and it'll retopologize. Maybe 800. It's kind of reducing the top cylindrical shape too much. That's pretty good, looks pretty good. But those are some easy ways to create a Lego piece that's combining different forms, remeshing, and retopologizing. So what I was going to say, if you don't have 2020, is to use the remesh or retopologize command in the mail scripting. So if you don't have that, what you can do is select your object in 2020, the button up here. You can just type in the code manually. So they are for remesh In the mail script line on the bottom left, you would type in P-O-L-Y, all lowercase, and then remesh, but capital R for remesh, capital R-E-M-E-S-H, and then a semicolon. And if you hit enter, that will run the same remesh command. Okay, you can still go and find the remesh settings here in the attribute editor, and then when you're ready to run retopologize, you can go back to the mail command line and do P-O-L-Y, then retopo, capital R, E-T-O-P-O, retopo, and then the semicolon, and that will run the retopologize command. And you can come back to the attribute editor, preserve. It is a slightly older command, so it has a little bit different settings, but it'll still kind of retopologize as you want to. So in 2020 we have a little bit more refined tools, but we can still recall these commands in the command line. Alright, that wraps up this video of how to create a basic Lego piece in a subtractive method with Boolean, and then remeshing and retopologizing. The next video we'll come back and talk about how to do the same type of model but with the additive method using like the extrude tools and things like that.